I knew the air had shifted the moment I walked into the break room that Monday morning. My coffee mug, my mug, was gone. 22 years in that building, and the mug had survived everything. 2 office remodels, 3 CEOs, a small kitchen fire, even the time someone mistook it for a measuring cup during a bake-off. But now it sat in the trash. Cracked in half, tossed aside like I was already a ghost in my own workplace. That was the first sign. The second came later that day when Daniel Whitmore, our brand new CEO, strolled through the halls like he owned the oxygen. Fresh off the board's vote, full of buzzwords and expensive cologne. He shook hands with the interns but barely nodded at the people who'd built the company brick by brick. He didn't look at me once. Maybe that should have been comforting. After all, invisibility had always been my armor. People forget that the quiet ones aren't weak. They're watching, recording, remembering. But something about his smile told me invisibility wasn't going to save me this time. "We're realigning resources," he said at the company town hall. "Future-facing initiatives, bold transformation." Those words never mean what people think. They don't mean innovation. They mean cuts. They mean somebody like me, steady, experienced, loyal, becomes an expense instead of an asset. Daniel started small, the way they always do. Canceling recurring check-ins, redirecting my approvals to junior hires who couldn't tell a purchase order from a lunch receipt. Meetings would mysteriously forget to include me on the invite. Little cuts, paper cuts, the kind that don't kill you outright but bleed you slow. I'd seen it before. New leadership storms in, eager to prove they're worth the salary. They clean house, not because the house is dirty, but because they need to rearrange the furniture to leave their mark. And people like me, the ones who fix the leaks before anyone notices water on the floor, we don't make good headlines. So I started pulling back. Not sabotaging, just not saving the day as quickly. If someone sent an urgent email at 6 a.m., I didn't answer until 9. If a contract came in missing signatures, I let it sit on the wrong desk for a day or two. And sure enough, the cracks began to show. A payment cycle delayed, a compliance checklist skipped, a client asking why documentation wasn't ready on time. The little fires I used to put out quietly now smoldered long enough for smoke to rise. That's when I noticed Daniel watching me from across the open office one afternoon, eyes sharp, calculating, like he'd already decided my fate. And in that moment, I knew. It wasn't about performance. It was about optics. He wanted younger, cheaper, flashier. He wanted culture alignment. I was just the fossil in his way. I didn't panic. I didn't beg. Because buried deep in the back of my mind was a memory. A meeting from almost 2 decades ago with a junior attorney who rolled his eyes as I insisted on a clause in my original contract. "This is excessive," he'd said at the time. "Good," I'd replied. "Then it won't cost you anything." And so I waited. The termination came on a Thursday morning. Daniel summoned me into the glass-walled conference room, sterile as a hospital. A cardboard box sat on the table, empty, waiting for my belongings. He didn't waste time. "Miranda," he said, voice flat, rehearsed. "We're cutting costs. Your badge. Now no thank you for 2 decades of loyalty. No handshake. Just the script." I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I just opened my laptop, typed one email, and pressed send. Attached was a single file from my cloud folder. employment_contract_2001.pdf. To my lawyer. Subject: terminated today. Body: see page 19, clause 14C. I closed the laptop gently like I was tucking it in for a nap. 7 minutes later, my phone buzzed. My lawyer had replied all. Not just to me, but to the general counsel's office, the CFO's assistant, and yes, Daniel himself. Attached was my original contract. Highlighted, annotated, airtight. A clause they'd forgotten. One that stated, in the event of involuntary termination after 15 years of continuous service, all unvested equity shall vest immediately at market value on date of termination. The company stock had soared in the last 5 years. My payout? Just over $10 million. That's when the CFO stormed into the room, face red, papers trembling in his hand. "Who approved this?" he roared. "We can't pay this. We can't afford it." Daniel's smirk faltered. The silence that followed was heavy, like the sound of a trapdoor creaking open under his feet. And me? I just sat there, hands folded neatly, heart steady. Because this wasn't revenge. This was protocol. And they had just activated it. The CFO's voice kept bouncing around that glass box long after he left, like the room was still arguing with itself. Daniel tried to keep his jaw steady, but his reflection in the window gave him away. The kind of smile you put on when a photo is taken just as your chair tips over. I didn't fill the silence. I didn't owe it any words. My phone buzzed again. Another reply. All from my lawyer, clean as a scalpel. Acknowledgement of receipt from legal, request for wire instructions, and a line that read, "Per the contract, acceleration is immediate. No NDA is contemplated." The phrase, "no NDA," landed like a teaspoon hitting a bell. Everyone hears it. Everyone looks up. Let me pause for 1 second since we're being honest with each other. If you're still watching and not subscribed, don't be the executive who trusts a summary slide. Hit subscribe. Read the fine print in your own life. Now, back to the building that suddenly remembered my name. I walked out with the box they'd staged for me, not because I needed it, but because it felt polite to let their story finish its sentence. The hallway did that thing it always does when a quiet person becomes loud without raising her voice. Eyes lifted over monitors, chairs swiveled, a cough that sounded like a question. I kept my gaze forward. The elevator dinged once. Doors opened like they'd been waiting for this moment too. Downstairs, I sat in my car and watched emails bloom on my screen. Legal wanted to clarify intent. HR wanted to discuss alternatives. Finance wanted a temperature check on settlement posture. It's a corporate dialect. A lot of words that never touch the ground. I answered none of them. My lawyer already was. What I did do was text Dana in accounts payable, because decency costs nothing and she'd spent years untying knots I should have been called in the first place to untie. I wrote, "Transition will be handled through counsel. You'll be okay. Backup vendor tokens today." She sent back 3 praying hands and a heart. She always was too generous with emojis. By afternoon, the ripple turned into a current. A former colleague forwarded a screenshot from the executive Slack. Legacy contracts audit. Urgent. Beneath it, someone asked if there were other clauses from the 2000 to 2005 era. That's the part leadership never plans for. If one person asked for a lifeboat 22 years ago, assumption says others did too. The problem isn't me anymore. It's precedent. I made tea at home and placed the cardboard box on the counter. Inside, a stapler, a photo of the office holiday party before the rebrand, 2 pens that only worked if you shook them, and my badge. The badge felt heavier now that nobody could take it from me. I slid it in a drawer next to rubber bands and a tape measure that always retracts too fast. An hour later, my lawyer called. No small talk. He never performs empathy he can't deliver in dollars and enforceable terms. They'll try to renegotiate, he said, because that's how they were trained. But the clause is clean. Your leverage is time and silence. Let them do the math in front of each other. Will they go public? I asked. They'll try not to, he said. If they must, they'll frame it as legacy obligations and hope investors appreciate adult supervision. But their bigger fear isn't your payout. It's the audit your payout forces, not revenge, I said. Protocol. Protocol, he agreed. I could hear paper sliding across his desk. You were right to keep the original countersigned copy. I thought about that conference room from decades ago. The junior attorney who told me no one is terminated after 15 years without a soft landing. I didn't argue then. I asked for a sentence in a document and filed it where future me could find it. There's a difference between paranoia and memory. Only one needs evidence. By evening, texts started arriving from people who'd learned my number through the grapevine. Melissa from legal. Are you okay? Can I do anything? Nico, a junior analyst I'd helped with a report once. Hey, not sure if this is related, but I found a compliance discrepancy in HR's classification archives last week. Should I be worried? I told him to send everything to legal with a read receipt and keep his head down. You don't need to be a hero. You need to remain employed. A recruiter I hadn't heard from in years wrote, "Coffee this week?" I laughed. The timing is always precise when people learn you're suddenly interesting. Around sunset, an email popped in from Daniel's assistant, short and chirpy. Daniel would love a quick chat to align on a path forward. Align. Another word that never touches the ground. My lawyer replied before I could. All communications through counsel. 3 minutes later, the assistant asked for my lawyer's availability tomorrow morning. There's a rhythm to panic. It comes in quick asks and calendar holds labeled temp. Here's the part that made it real for me. Not the money, not the reply all, not the CFO's panic. It was a message from facilities, Eddie. He wrote, "Place feels different without you." We switched the light sensors back to the longer timer. People were waving their arms in the dark. I sat with that for a while. The lights only know to stay on when someone moves. Most of my career had been making systems stay lit without any performative waving. That night, I opened my old onboarding folder for the first time in years. The checklists I wrote, the runbooks for outages, the procurement matrix that explained why vendor A could never replace vendor B without a compliance patch. All of it was labeled plainly, not because I'm tidy, but because confusion charges interest. Somewhere in that building, people were discovering that clarity is not a soft skill. Before bed, I typed a note to myself. Not a manifesto. Just a sentence I wanted to carry into whatever came next. Don't let anger rewrite the facts. It's easy to mythologize what happens when the people in charge learn they've been looking past the person holding the safety pins. But nothing magical happened here. I read something everyone else stopped reading. I kept proof. I asked for help from someone trained to pull the right thread. If there's a message buried in this, it's not get even. It's get exact. You don't need to set the building on fire when the wiring diagram is already public record. In the morning, they would escalate to the board. Someone would say exposure. Someone would say fiduciary. Someone would ask who else had a clause like mine. And while they spoke a language that circled itself, I would pour coffee in a mug that wasn't cracked and wait for a wire transfer that wasn't optional. I didn't fall asleep smiling. I fell asleep tired. The particular tired you feel after carrying something heavy for years and finally putting it down where it belongs. By Tuesday morning, the storm had moved from whispers to tremors. I didn't need an office badge anymore to know what was happening inside. Corporate panic has a scent. It leaks through emails, urgent meeting invites, and those accidental BCCs people send when they're typing too fast. The first came at 7:42 a.m. A former colleague forwarded me a screenshot from an internal Slack channel, accidentally posted in company announcements instead of the private executive thread. The message read, "Legal confirms Miranda's contract is enforceable. CFO estimates $10.2 million equity exposure. All departments audit contracts from 2000 to 2005. Urgent." 3 minutes later, someone deleted it. But not before half the company saw it. That's the thing about digital mistakes. Screenshots outrun shame every time. I poured my coffee, decaf because adrenaline doesn't need help anymore, and sat at the kitchen table watching my phone light up like a slot machine. Messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. "Miranda, is it true? They really tried to fire you? If you need a reference, let me know." Some of them were sincere. Some were just fishing for gossip. I answered none. Silence was still the loudest language I had. Around 10 a.m., my lawyer called. "They'll try settlement," he said. "Expect a number far below the contract. They'll dress it up with benefits extensions and confidentiality clauses. Don't blink, I won't." I said. My voice was steady, even to my own ears. I'd built 22 years of scaffolding around being steady. Let me pause here, since you're still with me. If you're watching this and haven't subscribed, don't be the CFO in this story. Don't wait until it's too late to recognize what matters. Hit that subscribe button, tap the like. It helps keep stories like this alive. Back to the collapse. At noon, my phone rang. Caller ID, Richard Heller, CFO. The same man who once cut me off mid-sentence in a budget meeting to ask if we could circle back when it mattered. Now his voice trembled like an overloaded printer. Miranda, he said, we'd like to avoid unnecessary escalation. We value your service. Richard, I interrupted, all communication goes through my lawyer. But I hung up. Not because I was angry, but because nothing useful ever comes after but. That afternoon, the first cracks appeared publicly. An industry forum post popped up from a mid-level investor. Anyone else hearing about unexpected severance liabilities at Whitmore Group? Rumor is legacy contracts weren't reviewed. Another asked bluntly, how many Mirandas are out there? The market doesn't care about names. It cares about risk. And suddenly, I wasn't a person. I was a line item with too many zeros. By evening, another screenshot landed in my inbox, this time from HR's internal Slack. Caitlin, the new HR director who'd slid the box across the table, had written in all caps, "Who approved her termination without contract review?" Underneath, the general counsel replied with one line that froze me. "You did." I pictured her face when she read it. The smirk she'd worn during my exit meeting replaced by the realization that the trap door she opened was under her own feet. Dinner that night was quiet. I microwaved leftover pasta and scrolled through my old files. Compliance reports, vendor matrices, the classification audit I'd written last year that flagged dozens of employees miscategorized as contractors. HR had marked it, reviewed, no action. Now I wondered if Nico, the young analyst, had stumbled on the same document. If so, the equity payout wasn't the board's only problem. The next morning confirmed it. A message from Nico. Legal just pulled my audit trail. They know HR ignored classification issues. Everyone's panicking. Am I safe? I typed back, keep records. Say nothing. You'll be fine because panic loves company, but it eats juniors first. By midweek, the board convened an emergency session. I didn't see it, of course, but another accidental forward found its way to me. A draft slide deck. Title, Legacy Compensation Exposure, Preliminary Findings. Bullet points. Clause 14, C enforceable. Estimated liability, $10.2 million immediate. Potential additional contracts, 6 to 12. Risk of investor disclosure high. At the bottom, someone had written in red, root cause, HR bypassed compliance review. Termination executed without legal rooting. That was Caitlin's signature. Her shortcut. Her arrogance. I didn't smile. It wasn't joy. It was inevitability. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the streetlights flicker on. 22 years I had been their invisible backbone, their silent scaffolding. They called me outdated, but they had built their empire on the systems I designed, the protocols I protected, the fine print I had the audacity to read. Now those same systems were turning on them. Not because I sabotaged anything, but because gravity doesn't need sabotage. You pull the wrong beam, and the collapse happens on its own. I whispered to myself, almost like a prayer. Don't get angry. Get exact. The storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. By Thursday morning, the building I'd left behind was rattling like a machine with loose bolts. I didn't need insider access. Panic has a way of broadcasting itself. Vendors started calling me directly. My number must have survived in some contract appendix. One asked, Miranda, did you archive the back-end tokens? We can't process the payment batch I hadn't. That was never my job. My job was to keep those systems patched, documented, and stable. But when they cut me loose, they also cut loose the one person who knew how to restart the engine when the lights blinked red. By noon, 2 clients flagged failure to provide contractual deliverables. That's corporate language for, we paid. Where's our stuff? Normally, I would have fixed it in minutes. Now I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea, watching the notifications roll in like weather alerts. Let me pause here for 1 second. If you're watching this and haven't subscribed yet, don't wait until your own scaffolding disappears. Hit that subscribe button. Stay prepared. Because silence is only dangerous when you don't know what it's holding up. Back to the unraveling. The first public crack came from an industry blog that posted, Whitmore Group experiencing operational instability following senior staff departures. Departures, plural. They didn't even know I was the only one gone. That's how invisible I'd been. One person mistaken for many. That evening, my lawyer called. His voice was calm, almost amused. They're drafting a settlement offer, he said. Expect a round number, maybe $1 million, wrapped in a confidentiality agreement. They think fear of bad press will make you fold. They still don't understand, I said. This isn't about anger. It's about protocol. Exactly, he replied. And protocol doesn't negotiate down. The offer arrived the next morning. $1.2 million, 3 months health insurance, and a non-disclosure agreement. My lawyer responded in 4 words. Clause 14, C, no NDA. Within the hour, Richard, the CFO, called again. His voice cracked like static on a weak signal. Miranda, please, let's be reasonable. If this goes through, the board will have to restructure. Sounds like a governance issue, I said. He didn't laugh. By Friday afternoon, things had spiraled. A junior HR rep accidentally posted a message in the wrong channel again. GC confirms there are at least 5 more contracts with acceleration clauses. Immediate liability estimated at $48 million. Board furious, 5 more Mirandas. I wasn't an anomaly. I was precedent. I thought back to that junior attorney years ago who rolled his eyes at me. Maybe 5 others had pushed back the way I had. Maybe they too had quietly insisted on clauses no one thought would matter. Now those forgotten sentences were landmines under the boardroom table. Dinner that night was soup and bread. Simple. I didn't need champagne to celebrate. Watching arrogance catch up with itself was nourishment enough. As the sun went down, another text came in, from Nico, the junior analyst. They're asking me to explain the compliance report I found. I'm scared. Stay calm, I wrote back. Keep your notes. Don't speculate. Tell them exactly what you saw. Because panic makes people exaggerate, and exaggeration is where scapegoats are born. That night, I sat with the cardboard box still sitting on my counter. Inside, 1 stapler, 2 pens, my badge. They thought it was a box of endings. To me, it looked more like a warning label. Handle with care. Contents may destabilize entire structures. On Saturday morning, I opened LinkedIn for the first time in months. Recruiters, investors, consultants. 173 new requests. One message called me the compliance oracle. Another asked if I'd consider speaking at a conference about operational resilience. Funny how quickly a relic becomes an oracle when the lights go out. But I wasn't chasing validation. I was watching gravity do its work. That afternoon, another email reached me by mistake. A draft memo to the board. Immediate requirement. All involuntary terminations above grade level 9 must undergo compliance review. Effective immediately. My name wasn't on the memo. But I didn't need it to be. I had become the lesson etched into their protocols. As the weekend closed in, silence filled the hallways of the company I'd once held together. No more culture spotlights, no cheerful updates from HR, just a vacuum where their confidence used to live. And Caitlin? The one who'd smirked as she slid that box across the table? She hadn't posted on Slack all week. No memos, no bullet points, no slogans. She'd gone radio silent, likely buried in a war room, trying to invent a time machine that could undo her signature. But there's no undo button on arrogance. By Sunday evening, my lawyer sent me one final text. They've escalated to the board. Expect a revised offer. Larger. No NDA. They're bleeding and want it quiet. I closed my phone, made another cup of tea, and whispered to myself, "Don't get angry. Get exact." Because the storm hadn't passed yet. It was only circling closer. By Monday afternoon, the building had that evacuated look, even in photos. A friend sent me a picture from the lobby. No chatter, no music, just reflections in glass and the security guard pretending not to notice executives taking calls in the hallway. You can't photograph a meltdown, but you can catch its posture. My lawyer called first. "They've moved past negotiation and into triage," he said. "Revised terms incoming." Board level sign-off. There was a pause, papers moving. Prepare for full acceleration per the clause, doubled cash to avoid delay, and, importantly, no NDA. "Protocol," I said out of habit. "Protocol," he echoed like a benediction. The offer arrived 10 minutes later. It wasn't triumphant. It was clinical. Wire confirmation within 48 hours. Benefits bridge without conditions. No confidentiality or disparagement clauses. A line at the bottom. This agreement resolves all obligations under the original contract without admission of fault. I read it twice, then once more out loud. It wasn't an apology. Corporations don't do apologies. They do math. But the math spoke. Let me pause here for 1 second since you're still with me. If you've made it through this story and haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. Don't leave your own fine print unread. Hit subscribe, tap like, and tell someone who needs to hear this. Quiet does not mean weak. Back to the signature. I signed with a digital pen that never shakes. My lawyer countersigned, forwarded, and CC'd the people who prefer carbon copies over accountability. Within minutes, a calendar invite appeared. Transition access, 24 hours. It was funny in a tired way. The systems I kept alive longer than some careers now offered me a goodbye tour. I logged into my old inbox for the last time. The flood was immediate. Requests to pick my brain, to share historical context, to help us understand the procurement matrix. I replied to none of them. I wasn't withholding. I was done. I drafted one email instead. Subject line, final note. I kept it short. To Ops, AP, Support, Legal. You'll be fine if you respect process. Document everything. Don't wave your arms to keep the lights on. Fix the sensor. If you're overruled, write it down. If you need help, ask early. Take care of the place. I won't be watching, but someone will. Miranda, I sent it and logged out. It felt like setting down a box I'd carried too long without saying it was heavy. An hour later, another screenshot reached me. An all-staff email from operations. Effective immediately, any involuntary termination at grade 9 and above requires compliance routing and legal review. Legacy contracts to be archived in a central audited repository. Retraining for HR on classification law. No one wrote my name, but it was there between every line like watermarking. Caitlin disappeared from the org chart that afternoon. No grand announcement, just a sterile message from People Ops. We thank Caitlin for her contributions and wish her the best in her future endeavors. I pictured the cardboard box she once nudged toward me. I wondered who slid it toward her. Maybe no one. Maybe the box packs itself when a signature carries enough weight. The CFO called one last time, this time through my lawyer's line. He didn't posture. We've processed the wire, he said. You'll see it by morning. There was a weary honesty to him I hadn't heard before. For what it's worth, this forced us to fix things we should have fixed years ago. It wasn't contrition exactly, but it wasn't spin either. Good, I said. Then it won't cost you anything next time. He exhaled. Fair. When the wire hit, it was numbers on a screen, not fireworks. I made coffee, fed the cat, and paid off the last piece of my mortgage because loose ends are how worry sneaks back in. The money mattered, obviously, but closure mattered more. The quiet certainty that I hadn't needed rage to win. Just records, time, and the right sentence on page 19. Messages kept coming. recruiters, investors, a conference organizer offering to fly me out to talk about operational resilience, which is a poetic way of saying, don't kick out the person who knows where the breakers are. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I let the possibilities sit like tools on a clean workbench, ready when I am. I took a walk past the building that evening, not to gloat, just to make sure it still existed in the ordinary world. It did. A delivery truck idled. Someone held the door with a foot while balancing coffees. Life doesn't stop for board minutes or settlement wires. It just keeps moving, indifferent and exact. I stood across the street and put my badge in my pocket, the plastic warm from my hand. I didn't drop it in their bin. I took it home. A reminder, not a trophy. Here's the message I promised you. The one under the headline and the numbers and the Slack screenshots. Loyalty is a contract, not a personality trait. It should be read, renewed, and respected by both sides. If someone treats your steadiness like a discount, they're telling you the price they expect to pay later. Believe them and keep your receipts. I didn't burn the place down. I didn't need to. The wiring diagram was public. The process was written. The only thing I did was refuse to be talked out of the paragraph I put there to protect a future version of me who might need it. She did. I'm grateful to her. As the sun dipped behind the glass, I thought about that old mug, the one that started this for me. Cracked, tossed, forgotten. I bought a new one on the way home. Plain, heavy, not fragile. When I poured coffee into it the next morning, it didn't wobble or leak. That's all I wanted, really. Systems that hold. People who read. Work that respects gravity. I won't tell you to fight. I'll tell you to file. I'll tell you to ask for the clause. To keep the countersigned copy. To write the runbook as if one day you'll need to hand it to yourself. Quiet isn't weakness. It's alignment. It's the sound process makes when it works. Don't get angry. Get exact. And if someone slides a box across the table, make sure they also read page 19.